Hi, Kate. Hi, Sylvia. Thanks for being here. I will get started in just a second here. I want to make sure that you receive the handouts and handout each day. And I have some, and here's somebody else coming in. It always takes a second for people to come into a live workshop. So I'm going to get hi, Catherine. Thanks for being here on day two of the workshop, Three Ways to Support Others in Grief with a Holistic Approach. And I think I'll dive right in. I sent out a handout, and today's topic is about moving beyond the five-stage model that is so prevalent. Oh my gosh, it's my pleasure, Kate. Thank you so much. I really love doing this. I love sharing all this. It's so important. So today is about beyond the five stages model of grief support, and that's revolutionizing grief work with a more humanistic and soulful perspective and approach. Which, of course, yesterday I talked a lot about what a holistic approach would be, which is more humanistic and more soulful. So, building on that content, I think I will screen share my. I think I will screen share the handout for a second if I can find it and all the other stuff I have here. Um, Not seeing it. And thank you so much for coming into the workshop. Oh, my screen didn't share yesterday. Okay, thank you so much. Um, I think I have the settings on to have more privacy for you all for the recording. So I'll try that again. Let's see if I can get that to work right now. So the five-stage model, I'm talking slowly because I know some other people are going to come in and I don't want them to miss this aspect. It's so important. The five-stage model, for those of you that do not know that, was something that was created from a really important study 50 years ago by an amazing doctor, beautiful human being named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did this study, and she went to a hospital in hospice and terminal wards. And what she did was she studied these people who were facing their own mortality. And this study altered our understanding of dying, death, and grief. It was a really seminal moment in psychology to study this. And what her study showed was that people facing their own death went through five stages. So I'm sure you've heard of the five-stage model. It is denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So this is what a person, and all of these people went through these five stages. She distilled the study and the information down to realizing, gosh, there's five distinct stages we go through when we are facing our own mortality, when we've been given a terminal diagnosis: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And it really changed a lot of the way we support people at the end of life and all of that. The challenge is somehow this study became misconstrued in mainstream media. I think it was a Time magazine article somewhere maybe in the 70s, and it became attached to grief over the loss of another, not the grief we face when we've been given a terminal diagnosis by a doctor. Denial, oh my gosh, that can't be wrong. I don't believe it. That's not true. Anger, I'm so mad. Why is this happening to me? Bargaining, dear God, if you take this away from me, I'll be so good. I'll go to church 20 times a week. Depression, total shutdown, into acceptance. These were the ways that we flow through this massive psychological experience of facing mortality. but it was never about how we support someone in grief who has lost a loved one, another. So this outward experience of grieving another is not in a linear experience. We don't go through this step-by-step process when we are in grief. And to this day, I get clients coming in saying, I don't think I'm doing this right because I'm not in bargaining, or I feel like I'm still stuck in anger. And just this aspect of even thinking that grief is a linear experience and being treated that way and treating themselves that way is, I'm just going to say it. It's toxic. It is not the way a grief experience unfolds or expands. So I'm going to try my screen share here, and you guys let me know if this actually works. This is my 3-day. If you would, okay, that's the homework. I've got so many windows here. Ah, the tech. Love the tech. Um, 30 years ago, I only taught in person, so it was pretty easy to just hand you a handout and explain things with demonstrations and everything. This is today's homework. Are you able to see the screen share?
I can't, it just says you've started screen sharing, but it's just a blank screen.
Okay,
I
well,
don't know if that's just me though.
I'm not smarter than the tech right now. Um, well, you just get to see me then. Let me stop that one and see if I can try another one. Sorry about that. This is nope, it's really being quite stubborn. Okay. Well, what I'm going to talk about are these aspects of not only the 5-stage model, and, I don't like focusing on problem a lot when I do workshops or speak or teach. I really prefer to have awareness of what someone needs, which you might call focusing on problem or assessing or diagnosing. But I really like to make sure that we step into support, allowing, and compassion, and holding space for people, that we move out of this area of, what's wrong, because that just steps right into that mentality of grief being some kind of problem that can be fixed. Grief is not a problem that can be fixed. It's not an illness. It's not a pathology. It's not a brokenness, even though it feels like all of those things, which is why many people end up gravitating towards reaching out to a therapist or a counselor when they're facing grief and all that grief brings to the table: the dysregulation, the physical symptoms, uh, the loss of the attachment, the confusion, the shutdown, the laundry list of symptoms that attends grief is it's profound, and it often leads people to seek help. The challenge being that traditional psychology, or psychiatry, or certainly medical school, they teach nothing about grief and loss in their program, because grief is not a mental illness. It just feels like it. So one of the things I end up doing early on with most clients is finding ways to gently correct them or allow them their experience without pathologizing it. And that often means explaining to them that what they're experiencing is not something that unfolds in a linear timeline. So, some of the other ways that our culture gets grief wrong is in forgetting that grief is natural. Grief is one of the most natural things we all go through. Pardon me. And one of the aspects of that is treating people as if they're broken or they're ill or they're unwell, and reminding people that whatever they're experiencing and however grief is unfolding for them, they may be quite shut down. They might be quite angry. They may be getting all emotions all at once, or they may be feeling nothing. That's really something that brings people in for work when they feel that they're doing it wrong. And this five-stage model that is just saturated in our culture of that's how we grieve really causes more problems than you could really imagine, because people then are judging themselves. They think they're grieving wrong. They're not where they're supposed to be, and they're plotting this experience on a linear timeline. When we lose a loved one, we grieve for the rest of our lives. But the way we grieve and the experiences that we have while we're grieving should have an organic evolution to them. The way we are grieving 1 week after the loss of someone that is a core person in our lives in a healthy grief experience should probably look a little different 5 years down the road. So we always want to be careful when we have people coming in who are judging themselves to make sure that we validate their experience. So one of the ways we really get grief wrong in Western society is using the five-stage model. And that's sort of in the air. People come in to work or to support groups or in discussions with other people really feeling like they're not doing it right. Also, another way we get it wrong is by not understanding everything that grief brings to the table. Grief affects our mind, our bodies. It affects all of our emotions, not just sadness, not just sadness, not just people will say depression a lot, but we always want to be careful throwing that word around unless you are a licensed mental health professional. We don't use the word depression because that is a mental health diagnosis. That is a pathology if there is depression, clinical depression. But grief tends to look a lot like depression. So one of the things I make sure to do in my course is to make sure we really have a good understanding of these are the things that are clinical depression, and these are the things that might look like it, but are actually part of grief. And one of the interesting things about that right off the bat is that grievers who are having a healthy grief experience, they may feel depressed, but if they are seeking help, that is most likely not clinical depression, because people who are clinically depressed may have a lot of challenges asking for help. It is such a shutdown and it's so comprehensive. Obviously, that is someone who needs to be seeing a licensed mental health professional. So, not understanding everything that grief brings to the table, the trauma aspect of grief, the nervous system aspect of grief, the identity shifts that grief has. Grief, if you lose a partner, you no longer feel like a partner. If you lose a child, you may not feel like a parent. If you lose a parent, you may not feel like the daughter or son anymore. There's so much identity shifts with grief. There is also relationship shifts. There's the secondary loss of maybe you lost a partner and then you lose access to their friends, their family. Our world shifts from grief in so many different ways that I call it like, you know what a kaleidoscope is when you're looking through it and all those beautiful pieces of glass are showing all that different life. Grief is like you've just taken the kaleidoscope, shaken it, and now your entire worldview is different. And so a lot of what people have to do is really find the support to recreate aspects of the identity, of the self, of relationships, of their relationship with their body, their mind, their emotions, their nervous system, their spirit, and their soul. Those are the things I talked about yesterday in understanding what a holistic grief support approach is. It's working with all of those elements of a person. And that sometimes those elements are having their own grief experience. Your emotions in the subconscious are having all the feels, or like I said, sometimes none of the feels. And someone may come in thinking, I'm broken. Why am I not sad? Why am I not crying? This isn't normal. This isn't right. When they may be in this other aspect of physiology, which is the autonomic nervous system, may be on shutdown because whatever they went through was so overwhelming that their nervous system said, we can't take this. This is more than what our wiring can handle. We don't have the support. We don't have the experience. We just don't have the wiring to manage how big and awful this loss is. So we're just going to shut that down for a little bit to stay functioning. So what we can do once we are trained with all the tools. But what we can do is hold the right supportive space for someone to have a sacred and safe environment to begin feeling on their own timeline. That's probably the only time you'll hear me saying the word timeline, because the rest of it is this whole spherical experience of growing and evolving and learning to live life integrating the loss, the pain of the loss, and the loss of the attachment to the loved one. So another aspect of Western society that gets it so wrong is not understanding that grief is love. Grief is not only is it not a problem we can fix, and not only is it something that we don't take away from someone, we do not show up thinking, okay, this person's in pain, I'm going to help them feel better, I'm going to help them get through this, and I'm going to help take the pain away. We do work to alleviate suffering when someone is suffering beyond their capacity or beyond what a healthy grief experience is. A healthy grief experience involves pain. There is the loss, there is the sadness, there is missing their loved one. That's human or pet. Pet loss can be some of the most profound, painful, challenging grief to get through because of the unconditional loving aspect of our relationship with a pet. And sometimes human relationships are fraught with challenges. It's not always this kumbaya experience of everybody was around grandpa's bed holding hands, singing songs, and we watched him fall asleep and pass away. That's not the death experience often. That's a Hollywood version of death. And that's another thing we get wrong in our society. We have this idea of what death is going to look like. And because we are such a death avoidant culture, we have the medical system, God love it, but we also have the funeral and the mortuary system. We're not often, frankly, I consider it a luxury if we are with someone when they are passing and we are allowed to have that sacred time right at the end. Most of us don't get that. We live 3,000 miles away. Someone is very often in a hospital with, modern medicine. Again, incredible. It's a beautiful space. It is perfect for what it's for. And the medical industry also, once someone is in a hospital, obviously pre-hospice, that's when things change. When someone's in a hospital, there are teams of people trying to keep that person alive. That is their dedicated work, their calling, their oath is to do everything they can. And that is to keep life going. And so sometimes we also see people in hospital beds, the machinery, life-saving measures. There's a lot going on at the end. And oftentimes we are overwhelmed, clients are overwhelmed with the experience of this very traumatizing end, and then the body is taken away, that we never see them. There aren't these goodbyes that people probably hundreds of years ago and for millions of years throughout humanity, we had a different relationship with death. We had a different relationship with dying, and we had a different relationship with grief because those things usually went together. If someone passed, we would have time with them before burying them. So there's a little bit of a truncated experience in the way our system is set up now. Obviously, we don't have any control over changing that, although we now have a lot of people doing death doula work, and there is a sacredness that is coming back into the end. Hospice can be a beautiful experience, because you have a team dedicated to comfort. You're no longer in these life-saving measures. It is about comfort. It is about trying to get family and people and loved ones there to say goodbyes. That's a much more mentally healthy space. It's My point is, it's often very different for each person you're going to support and work with. But we want to remember that the grief is love, and the grief is actually how we heal loss, the pain of loss. So we never want to come in. So people end up going from this save them, save them, save them, save them in the Western medicine hospital type world. And then usually hospice is a little bit of more this thin, it's like a diver coming up from the bends, this decompression chamber. But if we don't have that, it can be a bit of a real, an abrupt shift for people to then move into grieving. Sometimes they're in shock. Sometimes they're in shock. Sometimes this awareness has not caught up with the reality that the loved one has passed, especially when there has been long-term illness, many life-saving efforts. Sometimes it takes a while to percolate, as I call it, for it to really land that they are gone, especially when we're 3,000 miles away or 10,000 miles away. You know, that's also not the way humanity developed in small tribes. We had a different relationship with illness, dying, death, and grief when we functioned in small tribes. Death was a part of our lives all the time. Living out on the tundra or in the jungle or on the prairies or indigenous tribes, we also saw death. It, don't make me start singing Circle of Life from The Lion King, because I will, because death was a part of this entire cycle, and we understood that in our bones. And I think we still understand that in our bones. It's just that our external reality in a very modern society, they don't match up anymore. So one thing we want to do is allow space for the the death experience that our client or whoever we're supporting may have experienced. And that would mean hearing that story. But a healthy grief experience involves not staying in that story. So we want to help our person that we're supporting find ways to also expand that experience, because what happens, especially with traumatic death, maybe an accident, maybe a trauma, war, violent crime, something that was a surprise or shock, and possibly seeing the loved one over a long period of time, in a hospital, or fighting through, a terminal illness. It's like we end up, as human beings, we end up stuck with that as the only experience. And we have in case you haven't noticed, maybe it's just me, we have a moderately sensationalized approach to bad news in our society as well. There's lots of sensationalized stories. It's always worst case scenario. That's what the news is. And we end up with people asking our grief client, you know, they're almost looking for the, oh my God, what did they die of? That's often the first question someone gets. So we end up with this, the scales of our client, more and more and more is on the side of the death, of the illness, of the trauma, of all of this sensationalized, this charge. And what can get lost is the other side, the love, the life, the relationship, the connection. So one of the things I like to help clients with, we listen to the stories, we don't truncate, we don't stop stories, but we do want to help steer our clients into holding space that remembers the relationship, that remembers the love, and remembering that grieving is love, and grieving is healing the pain of the loss. Grieving is the way we heal the pain. We do not heal grief. We heal the pain of the loss. Another way we get it wrong is assuming that grief is very linear time based. I mentioned that. Um, that's called chronos time, chronological time, whereas grief is actually a very, it's called kairos time. I talked a little bit yesterday about art therapy, movement, breath work, active imagination, and guided imagery. These are all tools that work in Kairos time. They're not in linear time. They're not in the conscious mind. They're accessing the parts of us that are connected to all things, all of our emotions, to the universe, to life, to love, to our loved ones. And so when we use tools that are subconscious tools, or kairos, which is this universal time of life, love, all of it at once, we're actually plugging into this really powerful aspect where we can help people allow in more support and even start finding little baby steps for self-support. So I discussed having little to no relationship with death or dying or grief in our culture. We're very grief avoidant. We're very death avoidant, and a lot of people just can't handle it. And when we have more grief informed people showing up for grievers and holding that space where they can share a story without it being truncated, oh, I don't want to hear that, that's upsetting, or I call it the ditto response. One really big way our culture gets grief and showing up for people wrong is what I call the ditto response. So you might see in Facebook groups or in support groups, and in fact, the entire model of group support for grievers has been what I consider a little bit of the ditto response. And that is, you say, oh my gosh, my dog died. All you get back from other people is, oh my God, my dog died too. Oh my God, I know exactly what you're going through. Oh God, that was so awful. We had to go to the vet and had this, had to make this, and blah, blah. And all of a sudden, the griever, it has had their experience and their moment of looking for love and support and patience and kindness and being seen and being heard has been hijacked. So that's why in my courses, I train us to make sure that we can hold space for another person without that need to fix, without that need to share our story. Because in my courses, we're working with your experience and helping you evolve your own loss, your own trauma, your own experiences, because you have to fill your own cup up to be able to overflow to help other people. You can't help other people from a deficiency. It'll either be codependence or you will burn out so fast with any kind of help or healer work. You really have to have roots in your own love and your own self-care so that you are filled with joy. People are often kind of surprised at my personality, my attitude, the way I work. Now, granted, I'm teaching here. I'm not doing grief coaching. I'm not this animated. I'm not this upbeat in a grief coaching session. I'm working to match the energy level of whoever I'm working with. And that might be a great deal of stillness, slowing my breath down. But when I'm teaching and when I'm out living my life, I'm a really happy person. And I say I take my joy very, very seriously. And turning to grief work actually upped that for me because doing grief work, and whether you're when I did hospice, I was the same way. When I had a healing arts practice, doing hypnotherapy and touch work and working with psychologists, psychiatrists, and medical doctors to help get deeper with their clients in a more concentrated period of time. Um, that was a lot of active imagination and hypnosis and um, really it's all alignment work. It's kind of all the same stuff. That when you do this work, that not only does it not drain you, when you are so aligned with doing something that I think is so important and so needed, and doing it well and caring for yourself and making your needs equal, if not even more so, to your clients, that's creating a life of abundance. Because abundance just is not just about money. Abundance is about, do you wake up every day and greet the day and say, I'm so happy to be here. I can't wait to greet my day. I can't wait to see how I'm going to show up as the best version of myself and how I'm going to navigate life. Because spoiler alert, life is short. We're all going to die. And living each day and living as a more empowered version of yourself and as the best version of yourself is not only the best way to do grief work or hospice or death dueling or any kind of healing and helping, it's also the best way to live your life. Life flows differently when you decide to be joyful first. So, sorry, a little aside there. Treating death as a failure, that can happen a little bit with the medical sector. Again, that's their job. I'm so grateful for Western medicine. I do not create a war between alternative practices and Western practice. That's just that would be silly. There's so much good there. There's so much life-saving work there. Um, uh, but like I said before, there can be all this effort to keep the loved one alive, and then they die. And so there can be almost this sense of failing because they died, when actually, as we said, there is 100% mortality rate amongst human beings. Obviously, nothing we would say to a griever. We don't want to treat grief as a solvable problem. And another way we get it wrong is by using toxic positivity with grievers. I mentioned that yesterday. I went a little deeper into day one. Toxic positivity is toxic positivity or bright siding or spiritual whitewashing. They're all the same thing. They're robbing the other person of whatever they're experiencing and feeling, their pain, their sadness, their confusion, their shutdown, their activation, any of it, by sort of giving a pat answer of, oh, but they're in heaven now, so everything's fine. Oh, or they're not in pain now. And granted, that may be true, but none of these kinds of statements like, oh, well, at least they lived to a good age. Or you can get another one if it's pet loss. I mean, these kinds of things are designed, people are trying to they're trying to shut the person's pain off in an effort to make themselves feel better and more comfortable, because we're in such a grief illiterate, death avoidant culture that nobody wants to hear that or feel that. Other than these weird sensationalized stories where some people are asking about all the gory details of an illness or an accident or how they died, you'll notice that the first thing that comes up, I even old patterns, when someone tells me someone lost, I hear in the back of my head, oh, I wonder how they died. Like, well, ho, 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 wait a minute. That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. Eventually, what we want to be focusing on with our clients is, how did that loved one live? And what was the relationship? And what was the connection? And what are some memories to honor? And how can we continue to honor them? Now, we don't do those things in acute or early grieving. We don't show up, because that can be perceived as a fixing mindset. But in this evolution, as we help support our griever to have a healthier, holistic, more balanced, and supported experience, they will get there on their own, because that's an inside job. So this is about us helping bring the aspects of a person back into alignment. Sometimes I call it almost like they have to sort of reinvent after loss or reincarnate within the same life. So a lot of that requires healing our own issues, because there is a charge when we're working with someone who has had a very upsetting, very traumatizing, very triggering or activating story. We want to be in alignment ourselves. And so, since we're in a culture and society that's out of whack a lot or out of alignment and not showing up in this grounded, centered, connected way for self, let alone others, healing our own pain of loss and healing any trauma is a really important part of helping other people in loss. In fact, it's probably the most important thing you can do to help others. I say this with all the love in my heart: work on your shit. Like, that is your gift to the world, because you are a cell. in the body of life, the universe, the world, a healthy cell, just being. I'm glad that you're here and you want to help other people in grief, and I'd love to help you with that. And if you choose not to do this kind of work professionally, just being a healthy, vibrant cell in the body of life in the universe is such a profound gift. I'm going to try not to cry. I believe that you heal the world by being the best version of yourself. And then what comes out of you is loving, is supported, is supportive, is aligned. You are able to show up for people in such a profound way that you really make a difference in the world. And one of the ways that we also, let me let this person in, sorry. I apologize. Somebody's asking to get in and I'm not seeing that screen. Um, this showing up as the best version of you, I mean, not only is it amazing for the world, it's amazing for you as well. Because one of the things about loss work, grief work, death doulaing, any of this, healing, helping, any kind of mental wellness field or any wellness field, is that what we don't transmute, what we don't deal with, our own pain, our own loss, our own trauma, any of it, what we don't transmute or heal, we transmit. So it's very non-conscious. If we aren't healing our own pain of our own loss, showing up for others is going to be quite triggering. So that's why a lot of that work is a part of my course. We work with you. We look at what you've been through and how your life experiences and your loss experiences have formed you and how they inform your view of the world and of others and how you connect with people and how you show up for others. So it's really important to always do your own work and always be working on yourself. Sometimes we're just too busy or non-conscious to show up authentically for other people. I think that's quite often in our society. A lot of times it's fear of intimacy. Showing up for another in grief and loss and death is a very intimate act because this is raw. This is the core of people. They've possibly been shattered, multiple losses, loss of a child. I don't want to do a laundry list of things that could be activating or triggering because they're activating or triggering to us as well. So this showing up and learning to have the best relationship with yourself and be able to be on a real one-on-one basis with your body, with your mind, with your emotions, with your nervous system, with your version of spirit, the spiritual aspect of you as a human being, and with your soul. This is soul work. So another aspect of grief that we get wrong is in our society is that we don't really have a lot of authentic connection, whether it's fear of intimacy or community, small community. We I said in day one, this beautiful quote from, I think it was an anthropologist saying, we were wired over millions of years to see 40 pairs of eyes looking back at us through our entire life. We would have been born into a circle of the tribe. We would have grown up. We would have been parented by the circle of the tribe. We would have been hunting and gathering and celebrating and evolving into adulthood. We would have partnered. We would have had children and brought more people into the tribe. And then we would have aged and passed, and the tribe would have been present for us when we lost another member of the tribe. It would have been a communal experience, but everyone would have known the same loss. So now the traditional support groups for grief are, I believe I read somewhere that they're kind of modeled after like a lot of the 12-step support groups. You know, you've got the people in a circle, in chairs, in a meeting room or a church basement or wherever. I haven't been to a support group in a million years because they were such a bad fit for me. If you are empathic or a highly sensitive person, or you've had trauma in your life, support groups for grief can be really uncomfortable. And what happens is we have trauma story, trauma story, trauma story, trauma story, trauma story. And then you get your turn of sharing your story. But I deeply believe, which is why I teach this work, I deeply believe that we need more than that. Because another aspect of Western society is that we categorize grief by type of loss. That means you're in a grief support group because of loss of a spouse. You're in a grief support group for loss of a parent. You're in a grief support group for loss of a child. You're in a grief support group loss by addiction, or group for loss by suicide, which frankly is one of the few that I really think is quite important, because losing a loved one to death by suicide is so disenfranchising that you're off in the Netherlands because no one can show up for it in your tribe. People are so terrified about it; they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to hear about it. It's grief is already lonely and isolating. It just gets more incrementally so with a loss of a death by suicide or loss of a child. Um, so those people all get this space where they don't have to explain what this is, because they know they're in a room with other people that understand that type of loss. But for the rest of it, each person that you support or work with is a unique universe of experience, of identity, of the relationship and connection they had with whoever they lost has never existed before in history and will never exist again. So I really believe in a hybrid model. I like one-on-one grief support. I think just the group work isn't enough, or it is very dysregulating for empaths, highly sensitive people, traumatized people, or people that just don't do well in groups, or who that need more. And I think everyone needs more. So those are some of the ways that we really get grief work wrong in our culture. And in your handout that I emailed, I put in here a few ways that we get it wrong. And then I thought I would ask of you to take this information and make it your own. Ask yourself, and you're welcome to share your answers with me if you like, either message me, email me, whatever you like. What has your own experience of loss been? And how did others show up for you? And if so, how did they show up for you? Did you feel isolated? Did you feel lonely? Did you feel misunderstood? Did you feel broken? Did you feel pathologized in that it was something that needed to be fixed and put over there because no one around you was comfortable enough to really hold space? And who was there for you if you were lucky enough to have someone that was there for me? Did you reach out to a counselor or therapist? We have more and more licensed mental health professionals reaching out and becoming grief informed because they didn't learn it in school, unless it was something they sought out and really wanted to learn that space of death, dying, and grief work. Most of the traditional education doesn't have anything about grief. So I get a lot of therapists and social workers and people, counselors, addiction counselors, wanting to plug my protocol into the way they already work, which is not the same as then what I teach to laypersons or coaches who really need the training, which is part of my course, of how to show up even on session number one. What do I do? What do I say? How do I show up? What do I do before? What do I do after? All of that. I say my course is soup to nuts. I I have people from all walks of maybe lives, becoming holistic grief coaches certified by me in this profound, holistic, very soulful and heart-centered approach. It's a very humanistic approach. Did you feel understood if you had loss or trauma? And I'm not even talking about loss by death anymore. Did you lose a childhood home? Did you lose a mate? Did you lose touch with someone that really meant something to you and they're just gone? Or maybe you've got, a family member who has struggled with addiction and you've had to cut them out of your life. Grief shows up in a lot of aspects of life. Now, my course is quite specific for training support for grief over the death of a loved one, but the work is applicable to any form of grief. I just personally stayed in my particular lane of teaching it a certain way because of the relationship aspect. And there's so much need out there. I kind of just had to put some blinders on and say, oh, I would love to be teaching also about loss from having an addict that you're connected to, or loss of home, or all these other things that grief brings to the table. Trauma has grief. Trauma must be grieved. Childhood trauma needs to be grieved, even adult trauma. So, did you feel rushed, or was there a timeline put on you? Did you feel that you were doing it right or wrong? And did you seek any support or help, or was there support or help for you to look for? So, a humanistic and soulful perspective. So, part of the course is really helping you shift from the way we operate in our modern Western society, which we all do, into the person that can show up for others with this humanistic perspective. It's a real like filter change on the lens that we use from the way we've been raised to do it to a different way that comes from your heart, not your head. So grief is not something that comes from the mind. The real grief work is from all aspects of self. Watch day one if you weren't able to see that yet. It's a deep dive into that. So, a soulful perspective for showing up for others as a holistic supporter is the idea of a grief experience being more of a whole, expanding model. This may be where they are immediately following loss, and maybe the first 6 months, maybe a year, maybe 2 years. There isn't a calendar, there is no set timeline to anyone's grief experience. And there are some markers that, if someone is at year 10 and this kind of thing is still happening, we want to take a look at that and see, is that a stuckness? But we teach all that in the course. We learn that in the course. So this expansion model of taking maybe a ball and it growing out throughout the rest of their life, that's a healthy way to grieve. Now, that expansion model does this. It's a living thing. It breathes in and out, because you could be going along, you thinking, oh my gosh, it's year 4. I'm doing so great. I'm able to work again. I'm actually even dating. I never thought I would be. And then comes a birthday anniversary, or a thaniversary, which is the anniversary of the loss, or somebody walked by with the same cologne, or you heard a song, and that model just goes right back to here. So this living, breathing model of how someone grieves in a healthy way is not a linear, which is line. It's not point A, point Z. I crossed the finish line. I'm not grieving anymore. That doesn't happen. We grieve for the rest of our lives. What we want to help people do is grieve in a healthy way that is allowing them to live with the loss. And another aspect of a humanistic, soulful perspective, instead of the linear 5-stage, all that I went through of how we're getting it wrong, sorry, I spent so much time on that, is the idea of integrating loss. Now, when we integrate something, like the pain of the loss, or the fact of the loss, or the emptiness of the loss, if it was a partner and they're not here anymore, this integrating the loss, or the space where our loved one used to be. I don't want to go too deep here because it's actually a larger concept, but that's going to be hard for me. But it's a way of shifting the way the griever relates to the loss. And what we want to always do is remind people that love never dies. Love never dies. Connection never dies. Now, I have a pretty large view of I'm not talking about what happens after we die. I'm not talking about religious or rules or belief systems here. I'm talking about the love. So you can work with anyone, whether they have a particular religious mindset or not, or they're an atheist, or they're someone that just believes there's nothingness afterwards. If you're working with a nihilist, there's still the love. The griever's love is still there. It just has nowhere to go or so they think. So what we like to do is help plug in ways with the griever, ways for them to not only continue loving and not only keeping the connection to the loved one alive, but actually even grow it. Because what I like to say in class is, I don't say this directly to grievers because it could be quite obtuse and, unless they're way deep into the work, there's always more love to give and there's always more life to live. And we often come up against clients where this part of their soul, there's really no other way to put it. This part of them just wants to go and be with the loved one. It doesn't want to be here anymore. Now, I'm not talking about suicidal ideation. I'm not talking about the danger of them ending their life. I'm talking about an aspect of the soul that goes and departs. And in shamanic terms, we want to call that part of their soul back. We want to help them call that part of their soul back because this is their life. It's their loss experience. It's their love experience. And we want to help them have tools to live the rest of their life with this grief expanding and growing, doing this. This is healthy. This is natural. You're not losing ground when all of a sudden you're back on in a puddle on the floor crying because it's your loved one's birthday. Yeah, yeah. And then maybe we help them find ways to throw a birthday party and celebrate their loved one. Use ritual. Maybe draw some things, paint some things, cook the favorite dishes. We're looking for them to find ways to live the rest of their life in a healthy way around the loss, which means integrating it and relating to it in a different way. And then the third aspect I have on your homework about a humanistic, soulful perspective is that reinvention of the self. It is this evolution that I like to call reincarnating within the same life, because you are never the same after loss. None of us is. None of us is the same after the loss of a loved one. We are utterly changed. But we have this way of wanting to go back and run an old program. But I want life to be the way it was before. I don't want to feel different. I want to feel the way I felt before. I want to feel safe. I want to feel loved. I want to feel supported. Whatever that loved one and that attachment brought them, we're also helping our clients. This is huge, by the way. We're helping them find a way to feel those things again in this new aspect of the reinvented self. Because once a loved one is gone from the physical, we're not going to be able to plug in the same way. We have to find a way to plug into that love and connection and all those feelings and all of that the relationship with the loved one brought to the griever. We have to find a new way to integrate and bring that in, and that requires a new version of the self, an evolved version that is utterly changed because of the loss. Again, we don't spill all this to someone in a first, second, third session because they're not going to hear it, but they're not going to understand it. So, like I said, in the courses that I teach, it's really important that we learn to have awareness and allowing, and we learn to assess exactly where someone is, because every human being you work with is going to be completely different. So we're learning a lot about people, and we're using our informed intuition. We're using some intake, not a lot, because we don't want to really hit a griever with a ton of questions. Sometimes we just want to let them feel and hold space for them. And I teach you how to hold that space with not only the way they need it, but with the way you need it. Because you don't want to be running all of this pain and trauma and stories and sadness all the way through your nervous system, because it's not yours. But how we show up with a big, open, compassionate heart with boundaries, that's compassionate curiosity. And we teach that in the course too. These are just good life skills, but they're really designed for helping people in grief. So this is how I'm going to leave you with this. This is how a holistic grief coach gets it right. We use conscious tools to support other people to help relieve suffering without fixing. We hold space for grievers that respects each person's unique experience. We're not bringing what happened to us to the table or to anyone else. We're holding space for them. We share ways to help our clients hold space for themselves because they're not going to have you 24/7. They're never going to have a therapist or a mental wellness practitioner, you know, even with insurance, we don't have people going to therapy once a week to hold that kind of space. So we want to be able to give them tools so that they can regulate. If they're awake all night with insomnia, which by the way is a common symptom in grief, certainly in trauma, because the one time when you really, really, really need rest after loss may be the one time you aren't getting it. So we want to bring in holistic tools that support the body, that support the mind, that support the emotions, that support and regulate the autonomic nervous system, that support spirit. And all of this feeds the soul so that they have the ability to expand and breathe and integrate and evolve. So we, as a holistic grief supporter, we learn to be the safe space. We learn to be the grounded container for other people's stories, for their pain, and for their evolution, growth, and expansion. We connect our clients with their own source of unconditional love and unconditional safety and support, of being really here right now. There's so much in the Western society of, because it's so in the mind, which I talked about yesterday, day one, that we're often stuck in the past and we're also stuck in the future. We're either guilty, blaming, second guessing, so much, oh, I should have done that differently, stuck in old story on repeat. That's being stuck in the past. Or we're stuck in the future. What's going to happen? Anxiety. How am I going to do this? How am I going to make ends meet? That was the other income. What am I going to do? Should I be doing? Like, that's anxiety is a sign of being stuck, projected into the future. Whereas conscious tools, movement, art therapy that we talked about day one, holding space, feeling our feelings. I have 24 conscious tools in my protocol. All of them exist in the present moment. And the more we can help our client get lined up in the present moment, they are able to get in touch with what human beings have always had, which is this deep resilience of the soul. And that is something that every griever desperately needs to tap into to make it through the colossal experience that is the loss of a loved one and numerous losses of loved ones. I get a lot of people with compound, or what I call stacked grief, loss, 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 short periods of time. And it really becomes so overwhelming that we then have tools to tease these apart. Because I will tell you a little tidbit here, we don't grieve a group. I mean, we may, I reference 9/11 a lot, but that when there is something like that, like a tragedy, we have this understanding of grieving, but we are not built to grieve in bunches. We are built to grieve one loved one at a time because the relationship and the connection was different. So if you knew four people in the towers on 9/11, your grief should be separated out to be healthy and to evolve and expand and integrate as a separate entity for each one of those people. So we want to be educating and flowing from a compassionate heart. That's everything. Educating and guiding our clients as they cope with their own experience of loss. Because we neither should nor cannot take away the pain of their loss, we want to teach them tools to navigate. 24 hours is an eternity in loss. It's an eternity. It's an eternity. So tomorrow on day 3, I'm going to talk about different ways you can show up. There is so much need in this field that whatever you want to do or however you want to help others, there's a whole need there. There's a whole lane for you. And being authentic with how you show up, because it's something that's natural to you, is a more empowered way to work. So we want to educate them they cope with their own loss in a responsible, personalized, and respectful way, that we're showing up in their paradigm. We have to show up and meet them where they are. And we also support them by helping them identify things that can be healed, like trauma, and helping them navigate and integrate the things that must be born. We cannot fix death as much as we would like to. And we can't fix that grief has pain. But what we want to do is show up for people and help them transmute the things that can evolve. Things like guilt, things like regret, things like trauma. And then we also always, as a holistic grief supporter, we always prioritize our own growth and our own healing and our own lives. That's very important. So I thank you very much for joining me today. Tomorrow, I'm going to go into aspects of the, sorry, I've got a little thing on my computer here. Boy, I'm having a weird tech day. I'm going to go into aspects of, what am I talking about tomorrow? Of turning your own pain of loss and or trauma into an aligned purpose. Because when we've gone through a lot in life, it at some point, when you're ready, only when you're ready, which is why I interview everyone before I take them into my course. I make sure the readiness is there. At some point, we can take our life experiences and we can do good with them, and we can turn and help others, and we can say, I'm here for you in a loving, whole, healed way. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope to see you tomorrow. Please message me or let me know if you are able to watch all 3 days, because I do like to send a gift out to people who attend all 3 days of the workshop. And I will look forward to seeing you, and I will see you soon. Take care. Mwah.